and then begin with our questions. So if I start with...
I'm Karen Jensen-Stone, Constable of St Martin and member of the panel.
Deputy Lucy Stevenson, member of the panel.
Deputy Philip Balash, member of the panel.
And perhaps, Minister, if you could introduce your side of the table.
I am Deputy Lyndsay Feltham and I am the Minister for Social Security. And we have
Suda Hamill, I'm Associate Director in the Cabinet Office.
And Sophie.
And Sophie Lassoir, Chief Officer for Employment, Social Security and Housing.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. We will begin, if we may, with some questions around the minimum income standards, which inform the living wage which part of the living wage discussions, transition. You're doing some work, I believe, on minimum income standards. A study has been commissioned. Can you tell us about the household types that are going to be in that study and how they're going to be selected?
So the piece of work is being led by the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development and his team. I'm working closely with that minister. Where we're at the moment is we're just nearing the end of the procurement stage. We wanted to ensure that the organisation undertaking the piece of work was the best organisation to do the work. It's quite specialist work, so it wasn't something that we'd be able to find the expertise for on island. So because of that, the procurement process has taken a little longer than what I or the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development would have wanted. But we are now in a position where we can move forward to that final stages and get those pieces of work done. Back to the question that you asked, which was about the household types. When we initially went out for quotes, and I think when I've discussed with it previously with the panel, we thought that we may only be able to afford to undertake the piece of work in relation to two types of households. What we found during the procurement process is that we can actually do far more with the money than we thought we could. So this is a good news story. And we will be able to do a variety of different household types. I know that the panel in particular was keen that we included single parent families. So of course that they will be included. But we need to get to the end of the procurement process, so then we'll have the scope of work then agreed with the suppliers, and I'll be able to give the panel more information. But I do understand that there is a private briefing that has been arranged already, so we'll give you more information at that.
Can you, just in terms of that timetable which has slipped, can you provide us with some information about when you will complete that commissioning process and when the work will therefore begin?
The work will begin within the next couple of months, is my understanding. The supplier is stood up and ready to go. The aim has always been to get that piece of work completed around the end of this term of office, so that it will be ready to inform the next incoming government, so that they have the information to inform the next common strategic policy.
Is it the intention to publish the report in full?
I believe that the report will be published. It is an academic institution that will be undertaking the work, and academic institutions do like to publish that work as well.
Would the findings from the study inform other parts of the social security brief, for example, benefit levels and so on, or is it going to be focused entirely on, or will it be used entirely for working around the living wage?
I think it's going to be an incredibly useful piece of work on a number of levels. Not only will it be able to inform where we may go with minimum wage increases into the future, I think it's really important for a social security minister to also understand how minimum income standards may well affect benefit levels and things like that into the future. So I think what it's going to do is give us all a far richer understanding of the cost of living in the island, and also what groups of people understand to be what those minimum standards are for different households as well.
So in terms of those other things that it might inform, have you been able to sort of design the commissioning of that with that in mind, or was it designed purely with the living wage issues in mind?
So the minimum income standards piece of work is a very specific type of work.
Yeah.
So it's not us designing the methodology. We're using the leaders in the field of defining what a minimum income standard looks like for it. So it's not for us to define the specific methodology. What we're looking for is the outcome, which is what a minimum income standard might look like in Jersey for different types of households.
If I could just broaden out for a moment and look at the living wage increases, which obviously we had one in April. The next one is forecast to bring the the minimum wage up to the living wage in the next setting in April, I think it is, isn't it? What work has been done so far? Or interactions have you had at a less formal level to ascertain the impact of that living wage, the minimum wage increase, and to balance the potential benefits to people who are receiving the minimum wage, keep getting it wrong, minimum wage, with potential risks to employers who are struggling with the stress of that in their wage bills?
I mean, firstly, to be clear, even in 2026, we won't be at a stage where we're at a living wage. So I want to make that absolutely clear. The States Assembly commitment was to work towards 2/3 of the median wage. Again, I will reiterate what I've said to the panel before. That commitment was to get to 2/3 of the median wage by 2026. We're effectively seeing a year's lag because we're using I could get my years right now, the 2024 median wage to calculate the 2/3 of the median wage for 2026. So I want to be absolutely clear. This isn't a rushed process. And in fact, I could be criticised for not meeting the States Assembly's true commitment of that 2/3 of the median wage, because if you were going to do that in the absolute way, you'd do the 2/3 of the median wage as it is understood at 2026. So we are lagging behind there. In terms of the effect, I think what we've seen by the recent wage statistics is that we have seen a real terms increase in wages. So in effect, the policy, the objective of the policy change has been met. We're also obviously rolling out the Better Business Support Package, which is, firmly under the control of the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. So it's him that will be having those conversations with the different sectors. As I've said before, I've always maintained conversations with that minister, and when we decided how to raise the minimum wage, I did it in conjunction with him and in agreement with him.
Has that led to a corresponding decrease in the amount of income support?
It was never meant to lead to a corresponding decrease in the amount of income support. Yes, people will become less reliant on income support as they earn more, but that was never one of the objectives of this particular policy.
No, that wasn't the question. The question was whether it has led to a decrease in the amount of the minimum wage paid.
Income support.
I'm sorry, income support. So sorry.
I don't think we've got the statistic that would
we've seen
see, but like I said, we never expected that would be the case. We have offsets in relation to earned wages. It was always the principle that somebody working on income support, as the majority of people that are on income support do, will be better off by working. So it was never the policy intention to decrease the amount paid out by income support, because if people still need the income support, then they will get that. But if that's something that the panel is interested in, that type of statistic, then I'm sure that the department could provide it.
I mean, it is one of the things when you have general discussions around the increase in minimum wage. One of the arguments is that the burden of paying for low wages should fall on employers rather than on the state. So you do hope in general that an increase in the minimum wage would mean a lower burden on the state.
I think what we need to get to, and this again is around, we're not yet at that living wage that living wage point, and we won't be even at 2026. So if we were going to get to that point, I think we'd need to be raising the minimum wage even higher than we're anticipating. But also I think it's really important to remember that the way that income support works is it's very dependent on the type of household, the needs of those households and how the different components are met. So I think it would be quite difficult to extrapolate from data around whether the increase in wages have had an impact, but that's certainly something that we can do.
Okay. I'm happy to move on to the next line of question,
Right.
which is Deputy
Can we,
Barish.
can we talk, Minister, about the Social Security Fund, in particular in relation to the proposals set out in the budget? What is the current forecast for the fund's solvency beyond 2030?
So the measures that are in this budget won't have a long-lasting negative impact on the fund. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the figures that you've asked for in terms of the longevity of the fund in my notes. 2014. And I would like to give the panel assurance that I have sought advice from actuaries about the impact on the fund of this short-term reduction into the fund in the state's grant. So we've got the closing balance as a...
Or the,
Oh.
page, the
Okay.
graph is on page
Yes.
18.
Sophie, can you talk through?
So in terms of the longevity, do you mean sort of not in terms of the 4 years, but actually what the impact would be until, so the previous projections were based on a sort of 325 net migration. That was, there was a longevity until the 2080s sort of thing. The impact of the state's grant for a temporary 4-year period, it does bring it down slightly, but it's still well beyond.
There was a projection, wasn't there, for the ability of the fund to support the payment of pensions up until, I forget how far ahead it was, quite a long way, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what effect upon that long-term forecast this particular move is going to have.
So the advice from the actuaries is that this short-term change of money into the Social Security Fund will have a very, very minimal effect onto the long-term longevity of the fund, which is why I felt okay to have that in the budget. I'm very conscious that I have an actuarial review programmed for next year. We will also be asking additional questions within that review around what any future impacts of the fund may be and what is a suitable kind of amount for us to be putting in. I think the challenge that we face at the moment is that the state's grant is, of course, taxpayers' money. We've got a lot of financial pressures coming into government, and looking at the relative health of the fund, considering how well the fund has performed compared to the projections when it was first initiated, it felt that the best way of using those taxpayers' funds at the moment was, rather than put that money into the state's grant to support a fund that is already performing and outperforming itself and performing extraordinarily well, to deal with the financial pressures that we have got as an island that need to be resolved right now.
I mean, you say it's a temporary move, but the effect of the taking of this money is actually to support the excess of expenditure over revenue, isn't it? So why is there a feeling that in 2029 things are going to be miraculously better and we're not going to have to carry out the same task?
So I think it's really important to understand the challenges that we face at the moment. One of the places, as you said, which was I think the health minister wouldn't say. I think if I said over budget, the health minister may beg to differ, because of course he is saying that he needs greater budgets in health. We need to meet the health needs of our population. And then when we look at the other areas of expenditure, we have to respond to the outcomes of the care of children, the care inquiry. So the expenditure into children's services is incredibly important, and it's something that I see has to be an absolute priority for the island. So when I looked at what the things that needed funding were that would have been unmet needs had we not made this adjustment to the Social Security Fund, I felt that actually our taxpayers would want us to meet those needs. They want us to deal with the emergency services control room. People want access to more affordable childcare. And those are the things that we're able to deliver because of the change in the state's grant.
Well, people would probably say that that was conditional upon not affecting the pension outcomes of everyone, in fact, who is going to benefit from the Social Security Fund in due course.
We have no evidence to suggest that it will affect the pension outcomes.
I mean, Minister, it is a staggering sum of money, isn't it? £250 million is being removed from what would have gone into the Social Security Fund and is being used for other purposes. I mean, what would your position be as Minister if the same situation arose in 2029 and you were being asked to use the fund for extraneous purposes?
Firstly, I want to make it absolutely clear I'm not using the fund. This is taxpayers' money that was due to go into the fund as set out within the formula that was set out many years ago. The fund performance has exceeded expectations. There is no evidence to suggest that this short-term measure will impact the fund's ability to deliver what it was intended to deliver when it was set up.
It's
and
an
that's
extraordinary
why
sum of money, isn't it?
it is an extraordinary sum of money, but it would be of, I think, a greater loss to the island if we weren't able to provide those very essential services that we will be funding using that money. And
when will we have the actuaries' report, which will give us some firm indication of the effect of this change?
so I already have advice from the actuaries around the anticipated effect of this particular change. We will get the broader actuarial report, the full review, which will be done as looking at the fund as at the end of this year. We will get that report at the end of next year, beginning of 2027. I think that hasn't changed since we last met.
Right. Can I turn now to the health insurance fund, because the Social Security Fund supports, as you know, not just pensions and other benefits, but it supports the payment of for drugs and for doctors' fees and so on under the health insurance fund. And the budget shows that the health insurance fund is diminishing in value from 90 million in 2026 to 60 million or thereabouts in 2029. And on that progression, it'll have run out completely by, I don't know, early 2030s. Is this not a matter of concern for you?
It is, of course, a matter of concern for me. However, my position hasn't changed from the last time we spoke. I think it was in June, which is that the health insurance fund and how we move forward in respect of that fund needs to be done in the context of broader health funding. Now, again, the change that we're making in this term of office around the Social Security grant is very much related to health funding as well, and the need to ensure that our health services are fit for purpose. And again, and I'm at risk of repeating myself from the last hearing because the position hasn't changed. It's something that myself and the Health Minister are very keen to get right, is around the long-term funding for health as a whole. So that's not just primary care in terms of GPs and pharmaceuticals, as may be funded through the HIF, but also the broader healthcare. And that is part of the work that the Health Minister is leading around future funding for healthcare as a whole. It all needs to be seen within that context.
Your policy, as I understand it, is that everyone should have free access to primary care. Is that your position?
That's my personal position. That's outlined within my manifesto. It's not something that, it is something that we've moved towards. I'm very pleased that we now have free access to GPs for children and full-time students. I don't think anybody should be prevented from seeking access to their GP.
I only needed a yes or no answer, really. I mean, that is your policy. So is it the purpose of running the health insurance fund down to zero to support a move to entirely free access to primary care?
I think this is why we need to look at health funding as a whole. Access to primary care and ensuring that people are able to access...
No, could you answer the question, please, Minister? Is it the purpose of running the health insurance fund down to zero to support the argument for free access to primary care?
We are not running the health insurance fund down to zero. We are looking at health funding as a whole. Access to primary care can therefore then lead to savings within the secondary care settings. It is really important that people are not afraid to go to their doctor and that cost is not a barrier. And that is my primary focus.
Okay. I mean, one of the ways of making sure that the health insurance fund did not reduce to zero or something close to it would be to increase the percentage which goes into the HIF, is it not? I mean, 2% goes in at the moment from the contributions. That could be increased, and the Social Security Fund could easily afford that at the moment. So why is that not the policy?
As I said before, health funding is being looked at as a whole. That piece of work is being led by the Health Minister. Myself and the Treasury Minister sit on a group with the Health Minister who is leading that. What we need to understand is the full picture of health requirements and health expenditure for the island as a whole, and the place that access to GPs, access to pharmacy and other what could be considered primary care fits into that whole picture, so that the whole, health infrastructure works together to the best outcomes for islanders. Now, I think that part of that is ensuring that islanders feel that when they are worried about their health, that they go and seek that help from their GP as soon as possible. We know that that will save money into the secondary care process. Fewer people going into hospital, people being able to work for longer. So the benefits to me far outweigh the disbenefits that you're describing.
Can I just come in there for a moment? I think the point, if I've understood correctly, that Deputy Balash is making is you're waiting to do that work and doing work with the Treasury Minister and the Health Minister, but you've, in advance of that, severely restricted your freedom for manoeuvre, because rather than using the surplus in the Social Security Fund to go into the HIF, that money's all being spent on other things. And you have not, in your capacity as Social Security Minister, lobbied for that to go into the HIF.
At the moment, there's not an immediate need for that money to go into the HIF. There is an immediate need for money to go into children's services so that we are able to provide adequate children's residential care. And that is the immediate need for funding. So that is why we've come to the position that we've come to.
I mean, many people might think that moving to free access to primary care for everyone in the style of the National Health Service would be a fairly monumental change for Jersey, and it's one that you ought to flag up if that's the purpose of the exercise.
We already know where we are at the moment. We've reduced we've increased the amount of subsidy to GPs for visits. Now the amount of subsidy to GPs is £55 per visit. That should lead to reductions in the cost for people. We've also got free GPs for children. That is something I'm incredibly proud of. I'm proud of the fact that that people can take their children to the GP for free. And I'm proud of the fact that they are able to do that without fear of not being able to afford it.
I think most people would agree with you on that. That's what the state's decided. But wholesale access to the to primary care is a different matter. Are you going to take any steps in the future to safeguard the fund's investment portfolio against future volatility?
Of course, investment decisions about the fund are made by the investment advisors in relation to the investment plan that's actually laid out and via Treasury. So actually, yes, the Treasury Minister has to consult with the Social Security Minister, but investment decisions are effectively made by Treasury, with the advice, of course, from the Treasury Advisory Panel as well. So there's really very good and robust safeguards when it comes to investment decisions and how the fund is managed.
Okay.
But it's not managed by politicians. That's the
No, I
important
understand
thing to
that,
say.
yes. Fortunately. Can you tell us whether the actuarial review in 2026 will include international benchmarking to assess whether or not our funding model is still up to scratch?
I'm going to, because you're in the middle of working on that at the moment, aren't you, Sue?
So in addition to the statutory actuarial review, which the Minister's described, the Minister's commissioning a separate piece of work which will come through more quickly. So that will be available for the next Council of Ministers right at the beginning of their term. And that will absolutely, so that in terms of Social Security, so in the context of the Social Security Fund, the amount of tax-funded money goes into it each year, the level of reserves that will be prudent to hold as a whole, the way in which other countries address these issues. So this broad review, which is not a straightforward actuarial review, it's a much more broader policy-based review. The Minister's currently commissioning that. The details are still to be decided, but that's an ongoing piece of work. And that will be, so that broad review will be available to the incoming ministers very, very early in their term in the summer next year.
Thank you.
Minister, can I follow up just to one point you mentioned earlier? You said you had sought advice from the actuaries before agreeing to the reduction in the government grant to the Social Security Fund. What form did that seeking of advice take, and will you be able to publish that advice?
The form took advice in form of a letter. I need to, we can certainly share the advice with the panel, can't we?
Yes, we have perhaps on a confidential basis.
Yeah, it's not something that we've agreed with the actuaries would be made public, but absolutely share it in confidence with the panel.
You've mentioned a piece of new news, I think, which is that in addition to the actuarial review, there will be a separate piece of work that you're undertaking. Can I ask why, given that the need for revenue for the government was so acute and was flagged last year when there was a small amount taken from the Social Security Fund, why was more work not done to ascertain the strength or otherwise of the Social Security Fund in the form of bringing forward the actuarial review or commissioning other work that would have given comfort?
The very short-term measure that is being taken now
4 years.
It is short-term in relation to the longevity of the fund, is not going to have a long-lasting impact on the health of the fund. The actuarial review and the work that is required to undertake that review is significant, and the resources were planned along this timeline. We are, of course, putting more resource into that to get that additional piece of work done. And that additional piece of work will then be able to inform long-term decisions. But what we're talking about here within this budget is a very short term in the lifespan of the fund decision, and it was a decision made in the best interests of our community.
But Minister, you do keep using this phrase, there will be no long-term impact on the solvency of the fund. We would like to see the evidence for that. It seems to us that there is no evidence for that statement. It is an article of faith on the basis of what you're telling us at the moment.
I have just told you I will be sharing with you the advice that I have received from the actuaries, and that is the evidence that I have around the effect on the long-term impact on the fund.
When?
We can send it, I would imagine, when we get back, and I'm sure you'll have extra questions that you may wish to put to me in writing.
Possibly.
That would be very helpful. Thank
I
you.
wonder if I could add one at the end of that section. What assurances can you give that it is a short term being 4 years thing, that it's not just setting a precedent for this well, there's always going to be funding pressures, there's always going to be improvements that are needed.
But I think that's why we need to look more long-term with the actuarial report in hand, and have that available for the future government to take longer-term decisions on. The fund has outperformed where we anticipated it to be, and if it continued. So at the moment, we're looking at a 4-year a 4-year time period. That is all that is planned at the moment. Any future decisions will have to be made with regard to the actuarial review, which is forthcoming.
But it is being used to fund health funding, which won't suddenly drop after 4 years have gone by.
No, health funding is unlikely to drop after 4 years have gone by. There will be lots of decisions that any future government will have to make about both revenue streams, but also how to spend that revenue. At the moment, I'm making what I consider to be the best choices for our community at this point in time. There will be future choices to be made by future governments. Which, they may well be in terms of tax policy, they may well be in terms of other revenue expenditure. I don't have a crystal ball to see what future governments may do.
I think the point is, isn't it, that essentially you've kicked the door down to the Social Security Fund contributions. And the question is, are you going to try and put the door back in place, or is that the door gone?
Can I make a technical point? So it hasn't been published yet, but the Minister will be publishing regulations which would adjust the value of the state's grant in the Social Security law. You can only adjust the value of the state's grant by a state's decision. And the decision and the proposition that the Minister will put forward will only adjust the grant for the next 4 years. Have a short-term impact on it.
Understood.
And if nothing else happens in 2030, the grant will go back to its current form of value.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to move on. Yeah.
Moving on to family-friendly legislation, and obviously the panel's been reviewing and gathering evidence, and that work has been continuing. But we just wanted to revisit some of the areas that we've discussed at previous hearings and follow up on a few things. And one of those is around, will the department consider commissioning regular or periodic surveys of new parents to assess uptake, barriers and satisfaction with family-friendly leave, to ensure that you're hearing feedback on a regular basis?
I'm thinking around whether, because you talk about uptake, in a sense we already will have data in relation to uptake, and that data will only get better as our IT systems improve as well as part of the Transform programme.
We'll only have data on uptake to the point where benefits are paid, not beyond that.
I suppose the good thing is we know
do have,
exactly.
yeah.
I suppose sort of new babies is a much easier area for us to measure in terms of uptake, because we know exactly who they are, where they're born. So we actually do proactively make sure we frequently look at the report of babies born to make sure that we sort of cross-check that with what benefits have been paid out, do we know about them, and we proactively reach out if we've suddenly got a baby on our system and we're like, oh, hang on, it looks like we haven't had interactions, that sort of thing. And we do, because we're talking quite small numbers over a monthly basis, we can actually, the teams work in that sort of way to check. And in some cases there's absolutely, it's someone who's very recently moved with a youngster, and it's like, yes, they know, they're fully aware of their entitlements or otherwise, but in a way that it's quite compared to some other groups, which it's much harder to kind of know your target audience, whether you're reaching them. Here, that is something that we do, and we do kind of really try and have an active promotion of, let us know your feedback. So we try and sort of encourage that with our interactions to say, tell us what's worked, what could we do better, because that sort of learning culture is really important. So I think that's
fine where there's benefits that are payable, but where the legislation, there's a gap, isn't there, between financial benefits and the legislation, where people would end up in periods of effectively unpaid leave, which you can't automatically collect data on. So we're talking about uptake of parental leave generally, how and that measurement of how you know if people are taking full periods of leave or if they're feeling that there's barriers because there are gaps financially perhaps. And that's something that I think you can't capture automatically. And will there be an ongoing conversation about how it's being taken up?
So obviously I'm conscious that the sub-panel is undertaking its review at the moment. I'm obviously very interested to see what the findings and recommendations of that review is, considering the amount of input that you've had from both employers and employees. I think whatever government does in the future needs to be balanced on the resources available and what the value of expending resources on kind of ongoing surveys would be. But I'm happy to be informed by the findings of the panel when the sub-panel publishes its review.
Okay. And on a similar level, I suppose, I think that there's a gap around the employer level data and whether more could be done to collect data on their policies and how it's working for employers and what's in place to inform future policies. Because if you've not got an idea of what the reality is like out there in the employer landscape, how do you inform your policy decisions?
I think what's really important is that people, new parents, are able to make the right decisions for them. So sometimes data around uptake isn't going to be particularly helpful because what's right for somebody isn't going to be, what's right for one family isn't going to be right for another family. One family may choose to take longer periods of leave. Another family may not choose that and may choose to utilise the nursery provision. So I think there's lots of different policies that need to be looked at once. I'm pleased that the sub-panel has been put together because, as I've said before, the good thing around scrutiny is the opportunity to deep dive into specific subjects, and that's not an opportunity that ministers can necessarily take all of the time. So I'm really keen to see the findings and recommendations of the sub-panel so that we can plan future work in relation to that.
Okay, and as you point out, there's been a lot of information shared by people to the point that it's still coming in even after the deadline has come in. I think it shows it's a very important issue to lots of people. We talked about plans through your department for a new information leaflet about rights and benefits as part of the maternity parental leave, let's say. Have you got any updates on that, and will it be distributed beyond maternity packs?
I haven't.
Yeah,
The
so it's
leaflet was. We gave you the final draft, so my understanding is that's out and now in use.
And I suppose, yes, it's quite a robust, because it's with maternity, it's almost, we're confident that the feedback that we're getting from midwives, etc., is positive, and that it's reaching the intended recipient. We sort of had thought about, should this be a general flyer that we put out in parish halls, but it was almost felt that, well, actually, again, it's like, who these people are, unlike some things where it's, you want to catch people at lots of different places. So at the moment, but if you have feedback that, there's a wider group that need it, but it's quite a targeted group, and it's in and working. So
well, that's good news. Is it accessible anywhere for those who may be planning ahead and want to know their rights early?
it is on the website as well.
I think also there were some discussions around the materials available from JACS and how they might be improved. And we're just wondering if a joint working group might be regularly looking at that, for example, to make sure that just because it's raised at one point and perhaps improvements might be made, doesn't get lost along the way 6 months, 12 months down the line. Is it something that will be regularly looked at?
My understanding is the department has been working closely with JACS. There's been work ongoing around improving the JACS website, which I believe is coming towards the end of that piece of work. So that's an ongoing piece of work. As far as working groups or things like that go, I don't want to start solutionising to problems in a scrutiny panel as to whether that would be the right way to go. But the officers and JACS have continued to work closely to make sure that there are improvements into communications that are going out, and that website work is now nearing completion.
Okay. Is the department considering offering any financial or administrative support to small businesses to help them with family-friendly legislation, to help them comply with it? Is that something you've considered or are considering?
That's not something that I have considered.
Is it something you would consider in the future?
Again, if that's a finding or a recommendation of the scrutiny report, again, I haven't seen the findings of the sub-panel report. I'm awaiting that. My position hasn't changed since the last time we had a hearing. I've been encouraging people to participate within that. I think the scrutiny process is incredibly important. So I'm awaiting the report so that we can see whether there's any future steps. What I will say is that we are nearing the end of this political term, so I do need to be realistic about what can or can't be achieved. I have a published work programme which is using our resources, so I think it is likely that the findings and recommendations will be picked up in the next political term rather than this one.
Yes, so Minister, we'd like to discuss the trainee minimum wage rates. So what specific evidence or feedback led you to reverse the January 2024 decision to totally abolish the trainee rate?
So I'd had feedback from both employer and employee representatives that there was concern around apprenticeships being available. Also, other states members had discussed it with me as well, and the chair of the Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel had also raised that. I also had discussions with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development and the Education Minister. So I'd always made it clear, and as Deputy Reniford questioned me in the States around that an equal day's pay for an equal day's work. So I was keen to ensure that what we had in place was some set guidelines to ensure that the trainee rate was only used for something that was kind of a suitable, viable alternative to in-school post-16 education. So I'm pleased that the team was able to put guidelines together in conjunction with Skills Jersey, so that we have specified training programmes that people need to be on before the trainee rate can be applied. So I'm more confident now that what we have now is quite different to what we had previously, where anybody could have been paid just because they were in their first 2
Yes.
years of work, and we weren't guaranteed that there would be a proper training programme in place. What I will say is, of course, there may well be some training programmes that may fall outside of that employers want to contact Skills Jersey about, something that's less common, that may well be a proper apprenticeship. So if employers do feel that they have that type of apprenticeship which isn't on that list, because they're an outlying kind of field, I'm trying to think, I'm sitting here and there's a jeweller, so say it was like a watchmaker wanting to have an apprenticeship, then I would encourage them to contact Skills Jersey and discuss that avenue. But really what I wanted to be assured prior to reinstating that trainee minimum rate is that the trainee will receive something from the employer which will lead to them having a qualification at the end of it, which will improve their earning potential into the future.
Oh, that's good to hear, because I know that there were certain industries, such as I was approached by hairdressing and things like that, that they were saying that they couldn't afford to have trainees on that wage. But how will you ensure that the trainee rate is not misused by employers to underpay staff who are genuinely in training?
So that's where it comes down to us having those guidelines. I have asked, I think it's really important that that employees know what their rights are. So again, this is an ongoing conversation that I have with the team around communications, around knowing your rights, in a number of varying, whether it's employment rights or your parental leave rights. I think my team know that that's something that I'm keen that they do. And again, that's a conversation that I've had with the communications team about doing a piece of work there. Again, because I have spoken with the team around whether we have any data that would lead us to understand whether somebody's being paid a trainee rate so that we could check it, but we don't. So that piece of work on ensuring that people know their rights and that young people know their rights if they're being paid a trainee minimum wage is, to my mind, really important. Yes. But again, those people should be in contact because it's mainly Highlands courses, so we know who those people are. So there is that piece of communications work, I think, to complete on that.
I think the communications work is vital, because one of the questions is, what safeguards are in place to protect trainees from being kept on lower pay beyond the intended 2-year period. So hopefully if the trainees know their rights, they will be able to voice
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what modelling has been done to assess the financial impact of the trainee rate on low-income households, particularly young workers?
So because it's an alternative, because that would be like saying what's the impact of somebody staying in post-16 education. So we haven't done that type of modelling because the premise is it's an alternative to full-time post-16 education.
And how will you monitor whether the reintroduction of the trainee rate actually leads to more training and apprenticeship opportunities?
So that's something very much to work in partnership with the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning and his team at Skills Jersey. I know that Sophie keeps in regular contact with them. And again, this comes back to when we didn't have the trainee rate, I always said, if we were to do it, I'd do it in conjunction with the other ministers. I think that collaborative work is really important, and keeping those conversations going around the effect and the impacts so that we can ensure that we're continuing to do the right thing.
Okay, thank you.
Just one follow-up, if I may. The original decision to equalise rates and have no trainee rate was a state's decision. Are you planning to bring a rescindment?
The state's decision was amended at the time to still include that rate in the legislation, and it was around harmonising it. Sue knows the wording better than me, harmonising it at that point in time at the £10.50 rate. The advice that I've had is that I don't need to do a rescindment. We needed to act quite quickly. Obviously, when I signed the order, any member of the states could have chosen to question that order and take something to the states. I haven't had any negative feedback from any member of the states. I think I did listen to feedback. I listened to what my colleagues were telling me, and I felt that it was the right thing to do. I needed to work at pace in the recess, in the summer recess, to ensure that we could make sure that something was in place before the 1st of September.
I guess I understand you had to move at pace, but you could bring a rescindment now. We have a situation where we have an outstanding state's decision that has effectively been set aside. I think you've made a big thing in the past about the need to respect states' decisions. I just wonder where that sits with you.
That's why I was very keen to make sure that the rate didn't go below the £10.50 rate that the states agreed, so that we didn't go backwards from that state's decision. So I wanted to make the change in the spirit of that state's decision, which was made at a different point in time as well. It was made at a point in time when the government at the time wasn't increasing minimum wages to the extent that I have been able to do in this government. So I felt that given all of those changes and the change in me publishing the guidelines put us in quite a different space to when that state's decision was made to harmonise that rate at the time. But my understanding is that the way that that particular proposition was amended in such a way that it would enable a future minister to make such a change.
Okay, thank you. Can I move on, please, to a piece of work you've published since we last talked to you, which was the benefit fraud strategy, which I think was published in August.
So to be clear, it's not my piece of work to publish, it's the department's piece of work to publish. It's very much an administration piece, so I can pass to Sophie to discuss that because it's not a political policy.
I'm happy to do that. Whoever is the most appropriate person to answer the questions. I think, could you perhaps outline for us what measurable outcomes you're expecting from that strategy?
So, to be fair, the strategy is it's not a new strategy, but what we've done is publish what we have we're already working to, and we've published it on the recommendation of the Controller and Auditor General. We've previously kept the strategy internal, but I think for valid reason, there was thought that actually having a published strategy could help deter potential fraud. It's our strategy is primarily focused around, for me, a deterrent is if you can stop fraud happening to start with, that's always where you want to do. So that prevention piece is an important piece. So actually we were more than happy to publish something, but we've also got, various other strands in that prevention piece. And we recognise that fraudulent activity is a very small percentage of all of the benefit claims that we are involved with. But, there is that recognition of within that very small percentage, we absolutely do need to, where we haven't prevented it, the strategy focuses on how we detect it and then how we investigate it. And we are absolutely committed to investigating and enforcing where we find that there has been fraudulent activity. But that's kind of where the strategy sits, is that sort of, in terms of pecking order, deterring it and preventing it is absolutely at the heart.
That's useful context, thank you. How is the department improving its fraud detection capabilities?
So we are a department who sort of almost prides ourselves on making sure that we're learning lessons, learning from activity. We have had some, a number of fraud cases this year, last year, and actually in all of those cases, there is obviously a focus on the enforcement aspect and that particular case. But in each of those cases, we will also always step back and look and think, is there something here that we could have done differently, done earlier, and actually is there any, for example, messaging that we could do to that could have brought it, if we think of that circle of deter and prevent, is there something that we could do to actually have closed this earlier? So there's the learning lessons is a big part, but equally, you know, we've got a very professional, capable fraud team, and you know, investing in, actually they've gone through professional training, making sure that we are using our kind of the data that we've got at our hands to make sure that we're sort of, you know, as on it as we can be. And actually, even with our Future Transform programme, we'll have even more data available. But so it's actually making sure that we're spotting that fraud as early as possible, and that we're kind of confident that we are. But certainly the levels of fraud that that we're sort of investigating is absolutely where we'd expect it to be. So I think although there's the learning, I'm sort of confident that we're really focused on the right areas.
Can you say to what extent applications for benefit can be made online? And I ask that question because experience in the United Kingdom has apparently shown that when applications are made in person, it becomes much more difficult to lie or to dissemble, and fraud rates have diminished considerably.
So I suppose we encourage online applications, I suppose, but by there is quite a high bar in terms of evidence, especially if we're thinking in terms of something like income support. It's we absolutely do our sort of evidence levels of what we need to actually put a claim into payment is something where we will be wanting to see bank statements, pay slips. If there's any sort of assets, we'll be looking at valuations, these sorts of things. So often that will, although the application is online, we'll often, as part of that getting the claim into payment process, might be phoning the individual saying, oh, look, we know we've looked at your bank account. Can we just understand this regular payment here that's going to this bank account? Whose bank account is that? So that is very much the role of an advisor. It's certainly not, there's nothing about the income support application process that is an automated, goes through a system. It's very much each new application is assigned to an advisor who works through, looks at all the different evidence that's there, and it sometimes might include a discussion with a landlord, an employer, with consent, obviously, and the individual. So although the actual application is online, which really does help from our efficiency perspective, because it means we've got a very clear way of making sure that the evidence that we need is coming in a uniform way. Every claim is processed, and we're sort of confident that we're finding things there. Where the bit that we're really focused on as well is where making sure people know that if their circumstances change, so they've applied to us, they've got an open claim, if their circumstances change, a partner moves in, their job changes, that making sure people know that they must notify income support, because that is a change in their claim. So that's also available to do online as well, or they can obviously pop in and visit us.
Coming at it from the other side is, have you considered using AI tools to spot unusual patterns that might be indicative of fraud?
That's not something that we're using at the moment. I think the government is certainly looking at how AI can be useful to government as a whole. We take anything that involves, for example, personal data, individual claim data, is something that for us is something that we absolutely protect at a very high level. So we're not at the stage of maturity for us that we would be exposing our sort of claim data to AI. that's not to say in the future that there might not be some sort of learnings that we can take, but at this stage, we're more focused on our kind of internal analysis, because there'd be quite a lot of comfort we'd need to have, I think, before putting our customer data near that. But I mean, government as a whole, we're quite aware of the potential that could be there with AI. So we do have some work streams on that, but not to the point where we're using it.
Just finally, it's around 800,000 a year, I think, isn't it, that you say is benefit fraud?
For fraud, I know it's, yes, about, I'm trying to remember that number off the top of my head. I know it's, less than 0.5% of our...
So by international comparisons, it's a low figure.
Yeah.
Would you say that your attitude is that you're kind of comfortable with that? Do you think that's you're pretty unrealistic to get it below that? Or do you have a target to improve that and have a lower figure than you currently have?
No, we don't have it. We don't have that as an explicit target. I think for me, it's that if we can get the prevention and the deterrent aspect of the strategy really correctly, actually, it will naturally be low, but equally sometimes the value amount can be 1 or 2 cases. We're talking very small cases here, which sometimes, if a fraud has maliciously gone on over a period where people have deliberately tried to deceive authorities, kept information going, it's actually the value can be significant just from 1 or 2 particular cases. So that's why I think we're not target driven on a value amount, but we do have a sort of regular fraud board where we're looking at cases, the MI related to it, our confidence levels in the data that we're getting. So it's an area that we have quite a strong operational focus on. Yeah.
I'm going to hand over to...
Thank you. Minister, we have some questions regarding the use of non-disclosure agreements to conceal sexual misconduct or discrimination in the workplace. And as a minister, are you considering, following the UK, in amending the employment law to prohibit the use of NDAs in cases involving sexual harassment, discrimination or other forms of misconduct?
Obviously, I am closely following the changes of the Employment Rights Bill in the UK and know that there are some good things in there. Obviously, I have my work plan set out. Currently, within employment legislation work, we are doing the work to implement the whistleblowing legislation. So that's where the focus is at the moment. It's important that we maintain focus there so that we can get that delivered. I think that's a really important thing, is to keep focused on delivery so that we can get things done without kind of losing focus. I have asked the policy officer that works in that area to kind of give me a summary of where we sit in relation to the changes within the Employment Rights Bill. This is an area in relation to non-disclosure agreements that I would be interested in pursuing. It's not something that I have the capacity to do
it's not in your work plan now
this.
At
No, not at the moment. If we did do it, I think it would be important to involve the employment forum because non-disclosure agreements may be used kind of fairly broadly. I understand that the way that the UK, the barring is very specific around sexual harassment. So I think that kind of specific thing would be appropriate and would be something that I personally would support. But yeah, given where we are in this political term and the resources and knowing the work that we've got to complete, I wouldn't want to take focus away from completion of that work in order to move on to something new. But certainly it's something that I'd be supportive of.
So following on from what you've just said, so I take it that the department hasn't reviewed similar legislative, you've looked at the employment law, but you haven't reviewed similar legislative reforms in the UK or other jurisdictions have restricted NDAs in these contexts?
Not at this point in time. One of the first things that I did when I became minister was asked the policy team to give me a comparison between our legislation and other legislations across the world, so that I could get a good look at that. So we know where work needs to be done. We, of course, need to be careful at progressing things at an appropriate pace as well, so that as we've spoken about communications and ensuring that people understand change as it happens. The whistleblowing piece of work has been quite a large piece of work for the Employment Forum. And now we're at the stage of law drafting for that. So it's really important that we get that completed and to the states for approval so that we can get that into law first.
Thank you.
Just drawing. Philip,
Yes, I mean, my experience, Minister, in the Employment Tribunal is that NDAs are routinely used, and the effect is usually to obscure bad behaviour by employers. And the problem with that is that if bad behaviour is obscured, then there's no incentive to improve it or change it. May I express the hope to you that the department will look at what is being done in the United Kingdom in relation to NDAs.
Yes.
Could I follow up on that and say, appreciating that it's not in your work programme currently for changing the law, is it something that government could seek to lead the way on and set an example?
I can't speak on behalf of the States Employment Board. I'm not on the States Employment Board. I would hope that government would seek to set an example of being the best employer on the island, but it's not my place to speak on behalf of the SEB.
Something you could take back to them, perhaps?
I'm always happy to speak on behalf of better employment rights.
And so, do you know what safeguards are currently exist to ensure that NDAs are not used to silence victims of workplace abuse or discrimination in Jersey? This follows on from
Obviously
Deputy Balash,
agreements
really.
are agreements, and people
Yes.
take the choice whether to sign an agreement or not. We'd need to, and I think that's why it's really important that we involve the Employment Forum and do some proper consultation work. I wouldn't like to think that such non-disclosure agreements were being used to hide such despicable behaviour. And of course, I would hope that people would use their rights and take employers to the tribunal if the employment law is being breached in that way. I can absolutely see the issue with non-disclosure agreements being used in those circumstances.
Thank you. And as it's not on your work plan, would you be able to take this back then, please, to the Council of Ministers? Because it would be good if employers, legal professionals and advocacy groups could be engaged with to shape and propose any proposed reforms, because this is obviously a very important area.
Yes, and that's absolutely what the Employment Forum would do.
Yeah, thank you.
Deputy Balash, I think it's state pension.
Yes, Minister, the full state pension at the moment is £286.51 per week. Are you satisfied that that amount of pension meets basic living costs in Jersey?
That's one of the reasons why I'm so keen to get the minimum income standards piece of work done as well. Of course, pensioners, if their only source of income is just the state's pension, would then be eligible for income support to help with the cost of living. So I think that combined with income support, that we do have a good package. Whether or not it could be improved is something I would like to be informed by that forthcoming piece of work. We also have money in the budget to progress with the pension saver work, which I had paused on the basis of introducing the higher minimum wage. I didn't want to do the two things at the same time. So we will also be looking at the workplace pensions and the possibility of auto-enrolment as well, and how we can encourage people to save for their retirement as well. So there's lots of different facets. I don't think that it's a simple question to answer around. It was never we always need to remember that it was never the intention that the state pension was set up to be a single and sole source of income in retirement. So we need to consider things in the round when we answer those questions around.
Which makes the pension saver project rather more important. Would you agree?
It is an important project. I felt it was important to work on the minimum wage first, because of course, as I've said to this panel before, I thought it would be very difficult for me as Social Security Minister to say to people that can't afford to put a loaf of bread on the table, now you need to save for a pension. So for me, working towards a living wage was the thing that needed to be done first.
Is the pension saver project going to be taken forward during this governmental term?
Well, as I've just said, there is money in this budget to restart that piece of work. And I think, as I said during the last hearing, it is in the work plan to pick up towards the end of this term.
So the answer is yes?
Yes, my position on that's not changed since the last hearing.
No. But I mean, if would you hope to bring any work to fruition during this governmental term?
This is something that will require both consultation but also possible legislative change. So we won't be seeing actual change in this term, because that would be nigh on impossible given the time period left and the resources required in order to make such a change.
Okay. Is the department taking any steps to raise awareness of the importance of private pension saving, especially among young workers?
It's not something that we've currently got on the communications plan, but I'm quite happy to have that conversation with the communications department. As I said previously, I am really keen to ensure that we use our communications through government to ensure that people are aware of their rights and their responsibilities as well. So that's certainly something that I can take back.
It's gone into the budget to begin work on the Pension Plus project, which is obviously good news. Is there political unanimity to pursue that project?
Sorry, you mentioned Pension Plus. Did you talk
Pension
about...
Saver, sorry.
Pension
Saver project. Pension Saver project.
Well, the Pension Saver, the budget for the Pension Saver project is in the government plan. So
And you have
it has been
agreement on that.
Has been approved. There is a long road to travel, I think, before we get to what the end of that looks like. There will be lots of consultation to be had. Employers will want to have their say about what that looks like. And there's lots of decisions that will need to be made along the way. So there will be lots of robust discussion, I think, around what the end product looks like.
Okay. So there's agreement because it's a basic starting point rather than because any decisions have been taken.
Yes, I would say that's because there are lots of decisions that will need to be made along the way around what we end up with.
So there are no assumptions built in at this stage around whether it should be compulsory for employers, for example?
Not at this point in time. There's no assumptions like that.
Sticking with pensions, but on a slightly different note, the panel's been made aware of some unfairnesses or perceived unfairnesses within the law, particularly where people have over-contributed, usually because they've started paying contributions very early at, say, 15, and then worked their whole lives in Jersey, so they have a long contribution record, and where they achieve full contributions before pension age, they face a decision about overpaying, or sometimes have to overpay for a period, or taking pensions early and then losing, because it's 17.4% of their pension because they've chosen to take it early. And is that something that you're aware of? Is it on your radar? Are you doing any work around that currently?
Yes, I think I've received similar correspondence to the panel during this term of office. It's certainly something that was on my list of things to do. I had a piece of work where we looked about pension flexibility. Now it's around how I can fit what I can do within the remaining term of office with the resources that I have available. But certainly that type of flexibility around people, giving people more flexibility if they've paid in all of their years and then say, well, what am I getting back for my contributions? That was certainly on my list of things to do. I can't promise the panel at this point in time that I'll get that piece of work completed just due to resourcing requirements at this point in time, because we've got other things that we're doing in relation to contributions that need the same staff. So again, my message is we try and focus on doing the piece of work, get the piece of work completed and then move on to the next piece.
In your view, is it something that you see as fair or that needs sorting out for those people?
Like I said, it was on my list of things that I've asked officers to do. I think that as we are going to become, as we have an ageing population and we know that, things that we can do to encourage different choices, particularly as people get to what may be perceived to be a retirement age, encouraging people to think about working for longer is a good thing to do. Also, tackling any perceived unfairness is also a good thing to do. So yeah, absolutely, that was on my list of things that I want to tackle.
But we just can't guarantee that you'll get there before the end of the term.
No, I've said this before. I'm not in the game of making promises that I don't think I'll be able to meet.
Can I just push a little bit on that? I mean, do you accept that this category of people exists, that there are people in this category?
Yes.
Okay, so there are people there, and at the moment, there is no solution for them. They will simply have to keep paying the extra amounts. There is no individual solution that can be offered, no appeals process, nothing.
That's the way the legislation is at the moment. When I receive correspondence similarly to the panel, I do challenge things that I think may need to be changed, or I challenge, what can we do in this circumstance? The legislation is the legislation. So that's where we are at the moment. Like I said, I've got it on my to-do list of things to tackle, and we're working through that list.
And it's potentially costing these people money that were the problem solved, they would not be paying. I mean, we're talking probably mostly unskilled workers. Do you have any idea of the scale of the problem, how many people this might affect?
I'm not sure if that's something that we've got statistics on. It
It's
will
very
be
small.
very small.
We haven't looked at it.
And that's where, when we've come to prioritising the work to get done in this term of office and putting that list together, what we've prioritised is the work that impacts the most people first.
So acknowledging that point and taking it on board, it might be a small number of people, but as an example, for one of the examples we've worked up, just to give it as an example, is an individual overpaying for 2 more years, £16,500 they would be overpaying over 2 years. So maybe a small number of people, but it's not insignificant amounts to those people who've worked all their years in Jersey as well and stayed here and committed to the island. I think it's a hard one for them to swallow, I think, is the point.
Yes, if you can see anything on my work plan that you'd like me to consider deprioritising in order to do this piece of work, please let me know. But where we are at the moment is that I have worked through with officers what potential solutions might well be. I've given them an indication about my preference. We're working through the work plan at the moment. That is on the work plan around contributions and more flexibility around that part of that retirement age, but I can only do what I can given the time that I've got and the resources that I've got available. Thank you.
To move on, I think you're
Oh yes, sorry, I'm trying to pass it on to somebody else. Single parent income support we move on to now as well. Minister, do you believe that the current single parent component of income support reflects the true cost of raising children in Jersey?
Again, the position hasn't changed since the last time we discussed this. I think it was in June. Is that this is one of the reasons why I'm so keen to get this piece of minimum income standards work done. I am really conscious that we've got an issue with far too many children living here, you know, in low-income families that are struggling. That's one of the reasons why I was keen to secure within the budget some money for the back-to-school bonus to roll out next September. I'm hoping that as a short-term interim thing while we're waiting to look at the minimum income standards work, that at least will help families on low incomes who may be struggling with the cost of school uniforms and equipment when they go back to school next September. But again, it's something that is a larger piece of work to ensure that we're making sure that all families, not just single parent families, but all families have what they need and we don't have families living in poverty.
So the message is kind of similar to previous answers, that you're waiting for that work on the minimum income standards to then inform what comes next.
Yeah, it would be hard for me to make a long-term decision or make decisions without relevant information and data. I've taken a short-term decision to be able to get some money into the budget to help something that we know is a critical need for many islanders, which is around the cost of starting school, you know, school uniform, school equipment. That's something that I could do in the short term and get the funding in the budget to do. So I'm pleased to be able to do that. But I also know that that's not going to resolve the problem in the long term.
And I understand that there's a childcare component of income support in this case, but I think eligibility depends only on registered providers. Have you received any evidence or approaches about that presents challenges for those who rely on perhaps informal childcare or maybe flexible arrangements? They might not fit into the standard category. Is that something that's come up?
I'm not in relation to paid childcare, no. But I'm not going to start discussing individual cases in a scrutiny hearing.
No.
If
but
the
as a
panel's
general
aware
theme, it's not something you've been made aware of, that there's a group of people who are not able to access that component because they don't fit into a certain category of how they get their childcare.
Not outside of specific cases. It's not something that's been raised as a general. And again, I'm not going to discuss specific cases with the panel, although I would encourage panel members, if they are approached around specific cases, to please bring them to my attention sooner rather than later, and please don't wait for a hearing to bring it up.
Yeah, and that's certainly not what we're trying to do there. It's whether there's a general theme there that needs looking at. How is the department addressing the housing support gap for single parents under 25 who may not meet current eligibility criteria?
I think that would be a question for the housing minister, not me.
Okay.
Sorry, if you've got a child, you'd be entitled to both social housing and income support housing.
Are you talking in terms of income support, or are you talking about in terms of access to affordable housing?
So I think it's about
which minister it is.
about the housing support, the criteria for the components of income support. They would always qualify for it, is what you're saying, no matter ages and accessing, whether they can't stay in the family home and things like that. If you've got a child, no matter their age, they are entitled to.
The parent with a child, and the parent's under 25 years old, and the parents living independently, they would be able to access income support.
So it's where I suppose it's the criteria. Maybe it's something we could come back to in
Yeah.
yeah,
But there's-
maybe
there's
after,
no-
before we go
both-
into loads of detail.
But just to be
yeah.
clear to people, both social housing and income support housing components are accessible to parents aged under 25 and I think above 18 perhaps, but certainly below 25, yes?
So 18 to 25. Yeah. Okay. Right.
I think we've finished. Everybody
Thank you.
happy? Yes. Okay, well, Minister and your team, we finished 5 minutes early, I think.